I had intended to speak down here tonight anyway, but Mary just sent me the details of her insurance policy in case she sweats to death tonight. She said she's so hot. And I thought, well, if she's hot back there, I'm going to be hot up there. Bob Green, who was the longtime football coach at Montana Tech University, said one time, he said, it's like watching your mother-in-law go over a cliff in a brand new Cadillac. So there's mixed emotions. If I roll in here in a new Cadillac Wednesday night, I hate that she's gone. No. But we're not gonna sweat it out. Hopefully we won't sweat it out too much. I want you to turn to the book of Ruth. And we're going to talk about a man in the book of Ruth. We're gonna be in Ruth, but not talking about Ruth. We're going to be talking about a man by the name of Boaz. The book of Ruth is 4 chapters, and it tells the story of 3 people in particular. It tells about a woman named Naomi. Jimmy just read about her. She was a widow from Bethlehem. It tells about Ruth. Ruth was her daughter-in-law, who was from Moab, specifically not Bethlehem. And then Boaz, who is a farmer there in Bethlehem as well. And in the story, both Naomi and Ruth's husbands die. And because of their locations, because of where they were from, the expectation would have been that Ruth would have returned back to her people in Moab. Instead, she stays there with her mother-in-law. She stays there with Naomi. And so you have Ruth, who makes the decision to stay in a foreign country and to stay with an in-law. And this is not the same as staying in your home country and staying with your own parents or a sibling or something like that. And it's in that story that Ruth meets Boaz. And Boaz understands that Ruth, although she is a Moabite, was someone that was of great worth. He recognizes this in her. And we're not going to spend the evening talking about the story, but in perhaps a clever bit of scheming, perhaps, Boaz and Ruth ultimately marry, and they have a child. And it is through this child that the continuation of the line of David carries through. And it's in that line in which Jesus would be born. So when we look at the title this evening, that Boaz preserved the lineage, in many ways, we can look at Boaz as sort of an outside character, but the role that he plays is a pivotal role for it. I want you to turn to Ruth chapter 2 to start with. I tried to find paintings about this story for each of these slides. So these are all from about the 16 and 1700s on here. They all kind of tell the same story. It was hard to get very fanciful in the stories, but you see those are older ones, older stories right there. Let's look at Ruth chapter 2, starting in verse 4. In Ruth 2 and verse 4, it says, "Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, 'The Lord be with you.' And they answered him, 'The Lord bless you.'" Let's drop down to verse 8 now. "Then Boaz said to Ruth, 'You will listen, my daughter, will you not? Do not go to glean in another field, nor go from here, but stay close by my young women. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn.' So she fell on her face, bowed down to the ground, and said to him, 'Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?' And Boaz answered and said to her, 'It has been fully reported to me all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you have left your father and your mother and the land of your birth, and have come to a people whom you did not know before. The Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Now we'll come back to the story here in just a moment. But I think we can see a couple of things about Boaz right here from the get-go. His faith seems to be visible in his daily life. Notice in verse 4 right there that when he comes to the fields, he greets his workers. That may seem like a small thing, but when your boss says hello, it does make you feel pretty good, right? But notice that at the end of verse 4, there's no grumbling like, oh, this guy again, but rather they seem blessing to see him. They seem just as happy to see him. That relationship does not happen overnight. That shows a relationship there between the two. And we skipped ahead and we see not only was he kind to his workers, but he's kind to Ruth. And maybe I get that he would be kind to his workers because those are the people that are making him money. But being kind to Ruth is far beyond, because he really doesn't have any need to be kind to her. But Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 18 and 19, it told the Israelites what God wanted. And it said that God administers justice for the fatherless and the widow and loves the stranger, so that they should love the stranger, giving him food and clothing. Therefore, love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And so what God is telling them is, you have been a stranger before. You have been the bad guy, as it were, before. You have been the helpless before, and now your situation is improved. And what he says to them is now, to use a modern 21st century term, pay it forward. For us, or for them to do the same thing, and for that to carry on as we go. What do we see in verse 12? We see Boaz blessing Ruth. He says, you have taken shelter under the wings of the Lord. You know, we should do that as well. That's one of the requirements for us. If you want to hold your place and you go to Matthew chapter 5, this is early in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, and we go to these verses quite often. But in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 16, we learn that as Christians, we're to let our faith guide our conduct as well. Jesus said there, he said, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. There's a few things there. Remember the little song that we sing sometimes, hide it under a bushel? No, it says what? I'm going to let it shine. That's not a made-up song. That comes right from Matthew chapter 5. But it said to let your light, let God shine through in you. For what reason? What says? So that they may see your good works. But notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say so that they may build you up. It says so they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. The task that you do, the way that you shine your light, would make someone look at you and say, I want to be like that. Because I want to be Christ-like. That's what we see. There's no Christ at the time, but that's what we see with Boaz and the way that he treated his workers and the way that he treats a strange woman who happens to be in their country. Let's go forward. Ruth chapter 3, starting in verse 9. In verse 9, it says, and he said, who are you? And so she answered, I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative. And then he said, blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, in that you did not go after young men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request. For all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman. Now there is a relative closer than I. Stay this night, and in the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative for you, good, let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform The duty for you, as the Lord lives, lie down until morning. Now I want to skip ahead, verse 9 and 10. We skip ahead in verse 9, chapter 4, it says, and Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's from the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired as my wife to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance, that the name of the dead may be among his brethren and from his position at the gate. You, Dave. Let me read here. Well, first, the role of a kinsman had been established in the law. This seems a little odd for us today, but this was the law that had been set forth in Leviticus, and we'll see it here in just a second. But it was designed essentially to provide protection for widows and ensure that the family's name and inheritance were not lost. And so when when a woman's husband died, not only was he dead, but it also cut off the possibility of much progress for her. We live in a different time today where we see people marrying later and people of male and female having long careers and making their own career choices and money. But this was not the way it was in the old law or in the Old Testament. Leviticus chapter 25 and verse 25, if you want to turn back there, you can. It says, if one of your brethren becomes poor and has sold some of his possession, and if his redeeming relative, we can relate to this. There are times when people have to sell things because of financial difficulty. But it says here that the brother could come in and redeem it, essentially to keep that money there within the family. It's a practical matter, but that was what the law provided for. It gave them a chance to keep that family going, to keep that family under help. Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 5 and 6 says, if brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be married to a stranger outside the family. Her husband's brother shall go to her, take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And it shall be that the firstborn son which she bears will succeed to the name of his dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. These are things that were planned and prepared to keep these families going. I have friends of mine who are girls, females, and they only have sisters. And when they die, that name will go away. In the United States, we send the name down through the mail, and that name will cease to exist. Their lives won't cease to exist. Their honor won't cease to exist, but that name will cease to exist. But this was put forth in both Leviticus and Deuteronomy as a way to assure that the family's name would be extended. We'll see why as we go forward. But Boaz steps into this role willingly. And what's interesting here is that he didn't have to at all. He didn't really need to. He could have done things his own way, but he steps into this role willing. And so what did it require? Well, first, it required some sacrifice. He had to sacrifice maybe some dreams or some hopes that he had, but it also required some responsibility. He was taking on this situation that maybe didn't have to. It reminded me, when getting ready for this, of the story in the New Testament when the angel comes and speaks to Joseph. And Joseph, who's about to find out that Mary is pregnant, probably ran through a whole lot of emotions in his head, right? The biggest emotion was, I don't see how this makes sense. And we read in the Bible that Joseph had desired to put her away quietly in a respectful way. I'm not going to marry her, but I'm also maybe not going to make a big scene about it. But the angel explains to him what the situation was. And so in a sense, what Joseph does is similar to what Boaz does. He accepted responsibility for what would be a difficult situation. He sacrificed for what would be a difficult situation. Many people faced with this situation that Boaz had might have looked at this and said, I'll do it because here's a way to get a little bit of money. Anybody ever been married in order to get a little bit of money? I bet that's happened at some point in history, right? Probably happened one or two times over that. But sometimes people look at things and they say, okay, I can take advantage of this situation and I can maybe get rich. Or he might could have looked at that and said, here's a woman that I can enslave and make her do anything that I want. Maybe that's how he could have looked at it, but it doesn't do that. Just as Boaz redeems Ruth from poverty, which she certainly would have faced, and insecurity, which she absolutely would have faced living in a foreign country, just as Boaz redeemed Ruth, Jesus redeems us. Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 7, it says, in him we have redemption through his blood. It says, the forgiveness of sins according to the riches of his grace. Let's think about that for a second. If Boaz redeemed Ruth from poverty and security, did Jesus do the same for us? Yes. The poverty that we would have without Jesus, we'd be of all men most pitiable, right? That's what the Bible says. And so we might have everything in the world, but we'd have no hope of salvation when this life is over. And perhaps that would be insecurity. What's the song say? My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness, right? That's what our hope is built on. We don't have to be insecure as to what our future holds. Now, can we be insecure about our job, our house, our family? Sure, that's insecurity. Those are things that happen. But the one thing that we don't have to be insecure about is that Jesus has redeemed us. Ephesians 1:7 there at the end, the riches of his grace. And grace riches pile up a lot more than gold or monetary riches will. In the scripture reading just a few moments ago, we see this story Jimmy read about how this Boaz ultimately ends up preserving the lineage of Christ. If this story had nothing to do with anyone besides Boaz and Ruth, it still would have been a great story. If the book of Ruth had nothing to do with Jesus, if you took a few of those verses out and you just told this story, it would still be a good example for others to follow, right? To help someone in a time of need. But by marrying Ruth, Boaz sort of inadvertently becomes part of a much larger story. I've heard Dad say many times, when you marry somebody, you marry the whole family, right? For good or bad, right? For the good and for the bad, perhaps, in that situation. Well, by marrying Ruth, Boaz sort of steps into a much larger story. If you turn to the end of the book of Ruth, the very last handful of verses, Ruth chapter 4, let's start. Jimmy ended on verse 17, so let's look at verse 18 right here at the very end. It says, now this is the genealogy of Perez. Perez begot Hezron. Hezron begot Ram, and Ram begot Aminadab. Aminadab begot Nahshon, and Nahshon begot Salmon. And Salmon, notice, begot Boaz. Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David. Now, hold your finger there and turn over to Matthew chapter 1. I'm going to read Matthew chapter 1, verse 5 and 6. And I want you to tell me if it sounds familiar. Salmon begot Boaz by Rahab. Boaz begot Obed by Ruth. Obed begot Jesse. And Jesse begot David the king. David the king begot Solomon by her who had been the wife of Uriah. Now, that last part was new to you, right? But every other part of that should sound familiar, right? It's almost a repeat. Now, you follow that all the way down. We're not going to read all the way down through there because those are some hard names to read. But you follow it all the way down to verse 16. And it says in verse 16, and Jacob begot Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. Boaz didn't know what he was getting into, did he? Think about the providence of God in this story. They're the first handful of books in the Bible. We've been going through each book and teaching a story. But in each of these books of the Bible, we've seen famine, we've seen death, we've seen fighting, we've seen all sorts of things that would down the lineage of Christ. But every time, the plan of God survives. Now, I'm not saying it survived perfectly every time. I'm not saying that everybody did exactly what they were supposed to do every time. Somehow they made it work. This is yet another example of just that. By including Ruth, this Moabite woman in the lineage of Christ, what we see here is an early instance of the acceptance of the gospel for everybody. Ruth doesn't really fit with the rest of the people. She's outside of the people of Israel. She was a foreigner. But through the kindness of Boaz and through Naomi as well, she gets brought in to that group. Galatians chapter 3 and verse 8, it says that Abraham was told, in you all the nations will be blessed. Notice that there. It doesn't say some or a handful or even one. He says that in you, Abraham, all the nations will be blessed. We sing the little song at Bible school, right? Father Abraham had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham. They were all blessed. And you are a son or daughter of Abraham, as it were, as well. Revelation chapter 7 and verse 9, we read that after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hand. What he's saying right there is heaven will have a lot of different people in it. Heaven will have people of all nations. It'll have people of all tribes. It'll have people of all tongues. It'll have people of all backgrounds. Heaven is not just for the 25 or 30 of us that are here, but the door's open for all to come in. But what we have to be is the Boaz to a lot of Ruths to invite them in to that spot. I think the life of Boaz teaches us a few things, and hopefully a few things we can think about as we go home tonight. One, I think that we need to live in a way that others can see God in us. If you had only read a handful of verses from Ruth chapter 2 about Boaz and then cut it off right there, you'd have left here saying that if anything, he was a really good man. If anything, he was living by faith. If anything, he was polite and kind to people he came in contact with, and that's a good lesson for us as well. I think the life of Boaz teaches that we have to embrace the redemption that Jesus has given for us. And we have to share that with other people as well. It's not a private faith, but a public faith that we share with others. And we also have to think about one other thing. We're going to talk a bit about this on Wednesday night in our class as well. But we have to trust in the plan of God. You know, if we think about all the things that the plan of God has went throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, the plan of God's been roughed up a little bit, right? Been beat up a little bit, been kicked around a little bit, been tossed aside, rejected, thrown away quite a bit. But it's still there. And isn't it good that it is? Because we have the ability still to be able to grab a hold of it. Just as the faithfulness of Boaz blessed generations, our faithfulness and obedience can do just the same. I'm not going to ask you, but I want you to think for just a second as we wrap up. How many of you are Christians tonight because of decisions actually made by people way up your lineage? There's probably a lot of people in here that are in this church building tonight because your grandparents or great-grandparents or great-great-great-great-grandparents chose to become a Christian. Now, we have to work out our own salvation and can't worry about the salvation of others who have gone on before us. But the decisions that they made might have made it a little bit more common for your family to come in the church doors as well. And the decisions that we make today may be what keeps the doors open for other people going forward. There may be somebody 100 years from now who's baptized in this baptistry or something like it, whatever it will look like in 100 years. But there may be somebody baptized in 100 years from now in that baptistry because you're sitting here right now. You don't know it. They don't know it. And they may never be able to make a connection. Boaz and Ruth never saw Jesus. But what if they hadn't done what they did? Then we'd never see Jesus. So we have to live our lives for the benefit of ourselves today, but for others down the line as well. If there's anything that we can do for you, any way that we can help you, anything that you need, you've been going through difficulties and troubles, maybe we can help. You've decided that you want to make a change in your life, maybe we can help. You want to be baptized, maybe we can help. Whatever the case might be, the door is open. The baptistry is here. We joke about 100 years from now. Don't wait 100 years. You're not promised 100 seconds, right? If the time is right, let's do it now. Whatever we can do, we invite you to come while we stand and sing.